you everyone for joining us today for our final discussion on management practices in this COVID time, how we can adapt to these strange circumstances, especially with an emphasis on leadership. And as Mike said, we want to welcome our very special guest, Dr. Cynthia St. John, who is a professor of practice in our Department of Management. And in a moment, I'll turn it over to Cynthia and I'll let her pick the various aspects of her background and her great accomplishments to emphasize for today. It's too long to read. It would take me an hour to get through all the accomplishments. I'm going to let her pick the ones that are the most appropriate, but know that we appreciate, given her real world experience, that she has joined our department and she's a great colleague. Now, I wanted to mention that today's webinar is brought to you by our corporate education program. We are physically, when that can happen, housed in UTA Fort Worth, our great satellite campus at Fort Worth, and of course our great leader there, Mike Woolman, who's part of our team today, bringing you the webcast. One final thing to say in terms of setting the stage is that a few weeks ago, we had Dr. Ann McFadden talking about adaptive leadership and great leaders, but in the context of strategic marketing, why some firms were thriving in the COVID period and why others were not. And then the last seminar we had was with Marvin Brittingham, one of our professors in the management department with great real world experience. And he talked specifically about characteristics of adaptive leaders. But I think Cynthia today is going to drill down even further, and we're going to talk about secrets of great leaders and teams. What are some of the levers we can pull or push to make our leaders great, to make teams better? So we look forward to her remarks today. With that, Cynthia, let me turn it over to you. Please give us a little bit of your background that's going to be germane for today's talk, and I will occasionally pop in with a question as well. Thank you again for joining us.
My pleasure. Great to be with you all. So thank you, Dr. Seeger, for that introduction. And thank you, Mike, for letting folks know that I am flying a little bit blind right now. All I can see is the slide set, but cannot see the chat, cannot see you. So I'm sorry I can't see you, but they will be relaying chat to me. And there will be some times that I ask you to go ahead and enter information into the chat that they'll then summarize and relay. But wonderful to be with you. And at Bill's request, let me share just a little bit of background about myself before we dive in. So I have been, this is my second full-time year at UTA. I am fully enjoying my colleagues, my students, the College of Business, and the university overall. It's a wonderful place to be, as I'm sure if you've been associated with it in any way, either as a student or as any other capacity, you've hopefully had an opportunity to experience that as well. But prior to coming to UTA, I've been out in business, primarily in nonprofits, but not exclusively, and predominantly in healthcare, but again, not exclusively. I've also worked for NASA and United Space Alliance, so I've been in aerospace. I have done some work in other areas as well as a lot of consulting. But the bulk of my work has been in healthcare and over in the quality, performance improvement, organizational learning development areas. And my most recent position before I came to UTA, besides doing consulting work, was as Chief Learning Officer for Texas Health Resources. So had an opportunity to work with THR, serve as their CLO and also Vice President for THR University, and really be able to develop the leadership at THR as well as the workforce and the organizational development and teams. So kind of focusing on those four areas and being responsible for the overall learning of the organization. So that's how I come to you now, kind of through that path. Because we've got limited time, so we've got less than an hour. So I'm going to share a few secrets. Obviously, we can't go into every secret of great leaders and teams, but we're going to share some of the most germane secrets. And so we'll begin with that. I would like to ask you to go ahead and get ready a piece of paper and a pencil. I'm going to have you do something in a little while with pencil and paper or pen, whatever writing implement you have handy, or if you have the ability to write on a tablet or your screen, that's fine too, but just something to write on and something to write with. So if you can please go ahead and prepare that, and we'll dive in. We'll start with our great leaders. What is it that they secretly know and do? And quite honestly, this really is secret number one. If we want to think about it that way, this final part about it, it's not just what they secretly know, but it's also what they do. So many times we learn a tremendous amount about leadership, about other areas that are relevant to our work and our success, but we don't always apply it. We don't always do it. Think about how many times we've gone to workshops. Think about this workshop. And if you've participated in any others in this series, we take in a lot of information, but we don't always turn it around into practice. So it might not always serve us well. So please, as you're listening and as you're hopefully engaging through the chat, please do think about what can you apply based on what you're hearing in the next hour. What is it that you are going to take? At least one thing that you are going to take and you're going to apply, because leaders are good at consistently using and applying their knowledge when it's relevant. And so I want to challenge you to do that, to not just know it, but to also do it and do it with consistency and regularity. So think about one thing. So think of it as secret number one. But let's go ahead and move on to a question for you all. So do you know this man? And you can see on the screen. He was a key. He has passed, unfortunately. But he was a psychologist, a researcher, and an author as well. You may not know his face, but I'll ask you if you have any guesses, go ahead and start putting them in the chat, and then I'll have Mike share those in a moment, Mike or Bill. So you may not know his face, but try to take a shot based on the hint that you have. You may not even know his name when I mention his name in a little while, but you're probably going to be familiar with his body of work, so what he's worked on, and you may even be familiar with the book that he is responsible for. So go ahead and put your guesses in there. Mike or Bill, do we have any guesses coming in?
Not as of yet. We have one guess.
I'll pause just another moment in case he wants to take a shot at it.
Okay, so we have one guess that has come in and a couple not sure's, but Donald Clifton is who we have a response. And we have several Donald Cliftons coming in right now, author of Strength Finders.
Nice. Okay, kudos to those of you. I'm quite impressed, because most people won't recognize the face, but do definitely, and may not even recognize the name, but you're right, it is Donald Clifton, and you're correct. The book that he is most known for or associated with, even though he's not specifically the author, Tom Rath is given the credit as author, but StrengthsFinder is the book. So kudos, well done, everybody. Well done. And so while traditional psychology has long focused on what's wrong with people, right? Looking at kind of abnormalities and fixing people, and that has historically been the focus. Dr. Clifton was among the founders of positive psychology. So taking a different angle at that. Pardon me, my allergies are acting up. Positive psychology, which is the scientific and practical pursuit of optimal human functioning. So not abnormal human functioning and fixing, but optimal human functioning. and then later expanded on this with strength psychology. And so he revealed a big secret for leaders. And so we're going to leverage one of the secrets that he revealed, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper into why this is important. And so the secret that he revealed is that you excel in life by maximizing your strengths, not by fixing your weaknesses. Let me say that one more time. You excel in life by maximizing your strengths, not by fixing or addressing your weaknesses. Now, there's a nuance to that, because of course, if there's a particular weakness that is a showstopper for you, then obviously you can't ignore it. However, more often than not, we focus on weaknesses, we focus on fixing, as opposed to focusing on strengths and leveraging. And so that's the shift that occurred with his research and others who have done work in this particular area of optimal human functioning and what's also been referred to as positive psychology. So let's take a look at, here's a bit of an equation.
Dr. St. John?
Yes.
I'm sorry, one request that we just noticed too, because your notes pop up off to the side, is on display settings at the top of yours, are you able to go to full screen? Where it says display settings for you up there? I don't want to, stop it completely.
The answer is no.
Okay, don't worry about it.
Do that. So
I don't want to slow momentum. I just wanted to ask if it was possible, but if not, you're fine. Don't worry about that.
Well, let me try something else, because this way maybe I can even get to a point where I can see the chat, because if the full screen mode just isn't working for whatever reason, and you're seeing other stuff, I'd rather we focus on.
Right, that was getting.
Just it. So what are you seeing now? Can you see just the slide now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And the good news is I can now see people. So that's
that'll
great.
be great.
So,
perfect.
Now let me see if I can see chat. Well, I'll still let you tell me what's in chat, because I'm not seeing that at the moment.
That sounds great. I didn't mean to, kill the momentum, but I also knew that there was a possibility here that we could help not see the notes and get distracted in any way. So yeah.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is why your students like your class so much, Cynthia. You give them the answers.
Which I'm always, well, yeah. So, all right. So are you seeing now? You're seeing just the slide with maybe the smaller.
Yes, that's perfect. Yes.
Okay.
That's perfect.
Then I think I can still write when it gets to the time where I write on because I wanted to be able to be in that other mode so that I could actually write some things on here for you. And I think I can still do that even in this mode.
Perfect.
Okay.
But
perfect.
thank you. So whoever brought that to attention, our awareness, thank you. All right. So here we've got this equation of talent plus knowledge and skill equals strength. Okay. Talent plus knowledge and skill equals strength. And talent, when we think about that, I'm sorry if you're hearing an ambulance go by downtown Fort Worth. So talent is relative to naturally, and think that talent and strength are identical. And that if I'm naturally gifted at something, it is a strength of mine. And normally that's not the case. Normally it's about this combination of building on your natural talents with additional knowledge and skills to really turn it into a strength that is unique for you and that you stand out above others when it comes to doing whatever that is. And so you can see at the bottom of the slide that strengths grow from our natural talents so that while they can be developed, as we're talking about with additional knowledge and skills, they can be developed and refined. They cannot necessarily be quote unquote acquired in wholesale. So generally, if you don't have some type of natural inclination, natural tendency for something, then it's going to be very difficult for you to perform at the same high level of someone else who that does come more naturally for, and they have built on it with knowledge and skills and turned it into a strength. Okay, let's talk for a moment about how to recognize strengths and give you a sense of that. And then I want to go into the why. I actually do want to go into some of the research behind this, because you've probably heard of StrengthsFinder before, and I am not advocating for a specific tool. You can actually do this without any particular tool. And sometimes even the tool gets in the way because people just see it as something that's kind of fun or interesting. And that's really not what this is about. I want to advocate for a philosophy, for the concept of focusing on strengths over weaknesses, and encourage you to think how you can use that both for yourself in terms of your own leadership and improving your own leadership, as well as the teams that you are leading and that you are privileged to lead. And how can you be the best leader possible by focusing on strengths and not just on weaknesses? So let's talk about kind of how you identify strengths, and then let's talk about the why. Why is this important? Okay. So in terms of the, let's go to this, recognizing, and here's where if we were in the other mode, it would reveal one at a time, but you're going to get it all at once. So let me just walk you through and we'll do it that way. So first is that strengths have a bit of a yearning quality. And what I mean by that is you look forward to them. You are drawn to doing whatever it is. Okay? You can think of other things that you are probably repelled by, that you do not enjoy doing. So this is a draw. This is a pull. This is not something that you have to be pushed into or pushed toward doing. This is something that is, it's pulling you in. So it has this yearning quality. So think about that. Think about activities. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to put some of these in the chat. Okay. So think about activities and put it through these three characteristics, if you will, as I'm walking through them, and see what comes to mind for you individually. So the first one is that yearning quality. Okay. The second one is that there are things that you're naturally inquisitive about. And so you, it is similar to the draw, but in this case, it's, you get lost in it. It kind of time escapes you. You get into a zone, if you will. You've probably been in that place before where you just lose track of time when you're doing something. You're either exploring something or actively participating in something. And so think about those types of activities for you. What is it that you're kind of naturally inquisitive about? And when you're doing it, you just get lost in it. So that's the second. And then the third is that strengths tend to have a restorative quality. And so here they make you feel recharged and energized. They don't leave you drained or frustrated, which you can see over on the box that has the weaknesses, right? So weaknesses are activities that leave you feeling drained, frustrated, ineffective. Basically the opposite of the strength, that have the yearning pull that you're naturally inquisitive about and get lost in, and then are restorative, are energizing for you. So with those in mind, take just a moment and put something in the chat. Put something in the chat, and then I'll have, since Mike can see it and I can't at the moment, I'll have him summarize for me some of the things that are coming out. So take just a moment, put at least one, maybe one or two, whatever comes to mind for you that meet these requirements or these characteristics of a strength. Okay, Mike, do we have anything showing up?
We have genealogy research. We have a weakness, which would be complex financial spreadsheets, LOL. Sales coaching, friendliness.
Good, good, excellent. So yeah, think about those things. Now here's something to also consider. Think about what others have acknowledged you for in the past, okay? What do you get feedback on where people tell you you're really good at something? But here's the caveat to that. Oftentimes, when people acknowledge us for something and tell us that we're good at it, we might misperceive that as a strength. Now, it can be a strength. Run it through those three characteristics to determine whether for you it is a strength. But guess what? the things that we're good at are not always strengths. They may not leave us energized. I may be good at some things that are really detail oriented. I can do them. I have gained skill with it over time, but I'm actually a very big picture type of thinker, more conceptual thinker. And so that's what energizes me. So when I have to get down into the nitty gritty detail, I can do it. And people may even acknowledge me for it, that I'm really good at it. But that's not necessarily what I would call a strength for me, because it does not exhibit this yearning quality. I'm not naturally inquisitive about it. It isn't restorative to me. It actually leaves me drained and completely worn down.
And,
So do put it through that filter for you, and just make sure that for you it's a strength. So that's a differentiation in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And don't misperceive that what people tell you you're good at is necessarily a strength for you. Now let's get into, why do strengths matter? Why do they matter? Why are they important? In this top box, you can see that a longitudinal study was conducted, and this is Gallup that has done this study, okay? A 25-year study that has found some correlations with the regular use of strengths. And it correlates with higher income, with reduced stress and fewer health issues, and also with greater career satisfaction, right? So now let's go over to that left-hand side below the box. So in additional work that Gallup has conducted, they asked, and a pretty good sample size here, we've got 1.7 million employees across over 100 companies from over 60 countries. Pretty good sample size. The question was, at work, do you have the opportunity to do what you do best every day? Put in the chat, what percent of employees do you think agreed with that statement, that at work they have the opportunity to do what they do best every day? Okay.
So far, we are getting a range of 30%, 22%, 27%, 16%, 30%, 12%, 25%. So we're noticing pretty low percentages here.
Yeah, nice range, but you're right. It's kind of in the lower half, and you're on target, because the actual percent that came out of the study is 20%. 20% of employees agree with the statement that at work they have the opportunity to do what they do best every day. 20%. That means that 80% of our folks, whether that, and that includes us, right? So us individually as leaders or prospective leaders, as well as our employees, 80% are not doing what we do best every day at work. Look at the right-hand side in red. The study also found that the longer an employee stays and the higher he or she climbs the traditional ladder, the less likely they are to agree with the statement. So it actually goes down from 20% at that point. Kind of scary, but think about maybe your personal experience. And I can share from my experience. I mentioned at the beginning that I had worked my way, starting doing kind of hands-on leadership development, workforce development, and then worked as chief learning officer. With each promotion and further up that I went, I got further and further away from the work that I loved most and that I was best at doing. And so I found that, and I had to really kind of rethink my role and figure out how to get back to doing what I enjoyed, both within the role. And then ultimately I chose, I'm ready for a new activity that's going to get me back closer to doing that, and now doing it directly with students. So consider that.
Cynthia,
A little bit,
Cynthia,
yeah,
just a quick question.
sure.
And I'll pose it. I know the answer to the dilemma you just posed. That is, you were, moved up the ladder, you're chief learning officer. Why did you get there? Because of the various passions around, mentoring, teaching, whatever, but you're probably pushing paper
Yep.
As the chief learning officer. So the answer is
A lot of meetings.
yeah, well, there's a tendency for this terrible A word, administration, admin, pushing paper to, and it's as if, well, now that's, your highest and best use for you to manage paper. Now, I think this bias, implicit or otherwise, is in all organizations. And as I say, I don't know why, but I was just going to get your thoughts on why this process occurs when it's so obvious that, Cynthia's best use is not pushing paper. She's the chief learning officer, so let her learn people. Go ahead.
Yes, let me learn people.
Right.
Yeah, but you're exactly right, Bill. And organizations, surprisingly, have not figured this out yet. And this is why I'm passionate about sharing this quote unquote secret with you all, because I want to make sure that you get it and you feel it and you can break this cycle. Because it is a cycle that happens all the time within organizations and with promoting. So it's about how do we make sure, and here's something else that I'll add in that I think contributes to it, is most organizations think about one type of leadership, and that is more of the traditional kind of people leadership, right? And the further up you go, the more you are leading people and attending meetings.
Right.
And there are other types of leadership, such as thought leadership, and also even kind of an operational process type of leadership. And organizations don't understand that, and they don't recognize and think about different paths for individuals, for their really high performing talent that they want to promote, but try to break this cycle of promoting them into positions where they're now no longer doing things that either they're good at or that they enjoy, and it becomes more of a frustration and a drain than it does a benefit to them and to the organization.
Great answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
We also, Dr. St. John, have a comment right now, observation perhaps from one of our attendees. He says, high potential employees always move up into leadership if they choose to. That pulls them away from the core skill set.
Yeah. Yep. That's exactly what we're talking about here. It's exactly. And so for organizations to now give thought to, and for you as leaders in organizations that can influence this, give thought to, how can you still elevate your people? How can you recognize, acknowledge those high performers and make sure that they are continuously growing, developing, taking on higher levels of responsibilities, getting rewarded and acknowledged for that, both financially as well as non-monetarily? How can you do that without making it just this traditional path of, we're going to push you further and further up and further away from what you do best? And really the contribution that you make to the organization. So get thoughtful, get creative, look at better and best practices out there to figure out how you might be able to do that within your organization to make sure the right people are in the right seats in order to best serve the organization and leverage theirs and move from this 20%, right, that agree with this up to at least 80%. Try to flip that. If you think about the 80-20, try to reverse that. Let me go ahead and move us on, because this is going to be related to what we're talking about right now. And I'm going to ask you again to think about 2%, not as in 2%, but two different percentages here that you can put in the chat in a moment. So here we've got organizations that either focus on engaging, and the response here is if we truly believe that employee engagement is important, which research says that it is, right? There's strong evidence to say that employee engagement is important. It's directly correlated with customer satisfaction and engagement and return business, et cetera. So there's a lot of data that supports it. But assuming that we want to have engaged employees, engaged workforce, let's look at the percentages that are engaged in two different types of environments. More of the traditional environment, which is on the left side of the screen, which is the weakness fixing. Okay, think about weakness fixing. We go through performance evaluations. We in the typical sense, we identify what they're doing well, what they're not doing well. Where do we usually focus typically? We tend to focus on what they're not doing well, right? And maybe even create plans to then develop them in those areas so they improve in those areas that are not their strengths. As opposed to the other type of organization, which they're a little fewer and far between, but our goal is to ideally move more organizations this direction, that focus on strengths. and leveraging strengths, identifying people's strengths, making sure that they're doing the work that best plays to their strengths. So they are performing at their best. They are in that optimal performance place, which is going to be the best for the organization, right? So put in the chat, what do you think percent-wise? First, over on the left, chance of being engaged. So think about workforce, chance of being engaged at work when the organization does not focus on strengths, but focuses on weaknesses. And then the other side, the second percentage for you to add in there, what do you think the chance is of being engaged at work when the organization does focus on strengths? What does the research say? Go ahead and put something in chat for the when they do not focus on strengths and when they do focus on strengths.
So we are getting responses such as 20 and 80%, 15 and 76%, 40 and 80%, 20, 80 again.
Very much in line, especially with the upper one, the engagement when it's focused on strengths. The actual number that Gallup came up with based on their research, their data, is 73%. Okay, so 73%. Now the other one might be a little more surprising to you. It's lower than what most of you guessed. As opposed to that 20% that we were talking about earlier, 9%. So in terms of workforce engagement, when the organization is in the mode of weakness fixing, as opposed to strength leveraging, 9% is the general chance of being engaged. So it's a 9 versus 73%, certainly not insignificant. So think about the culture that you're in, thinking about this, and think about the culture that you have the opportunity to create and where you want to focus energy. All right. Here's where I'd like you to take just a moment. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just about to say, have you noticed in your experience any kind of trends and patterns when it comes to industry? So for instance, you're hearing so often, Silicon Valley, in these industries that are more like the Googles and the Facebooks and the Instagrams, having very different style of performance reviews, and different ways that employees can engage really in their day-to-day jobs. Are you noticing that with those types of industries, a little bit more advancement or progressive thinking and higher engagement from employees, anything like that? Or
yeah, I think it's really comes down to, and some industries are a little more forward thinking, especially because they have to be competitive within that industry. And therefore, if one organization starts getting really good at doing this and is having incredible results and is drawing in employees because they become a best place to work and folks want to go there, and other organizations are losing those good employees, then that stimulates them to, of course, do more. And so it kind of raises, I guess, all ships in that kind of, at least in that. So it may be by industry, or in some cases it may be by geography within an industry where that competition is. So yeah, those that are more forward thinking and engaging in some of these practices are seeing the higher levels of workforce engagement. Now you have to be careful though, because there's some where you can focus, for instance, on strengths, but yet if it's some of those high-tech organizations that especially that hire a lot of new graduates, right? And they have this expectation and reason why they have the coffee and the donuts and the snacks and everything provided in the workroom is because they want you to be there. They want you to stay from morning to night.
Absolutely.
They're going to feed you because they want you to keep producing. And so the hours are crazy expectations. Yeah. And so don't work against yourself in terms of employee engagement by doing silly things that are disengaging employees while you might be doing some things really well. So figure out what those things are that you're doing well, continue doing those, and then figure out those things that are really driving employees in the opposite direction of engagement and try to address those.
Very good. Thank you.
You bet. And by the way, Mike, what time am I able to go till?
And I'm on mute. You are absolutely good right now. You're at 1:37, so we have about 20 more minutes, before Q&A.
Okay, so I can take it all the way to 2 o'clock?
Absolutely.
All right, wonderful. I'll probably need every bit of that. Okay, so here's where get out your paper, pencil, or whatever writing instrument you have. And I would normally reveal these one at a time, but you can see them all here, but we'll kind of do them one at a time. I could ask you to write your name. That would be pretty typical, but that wouldn't be fun, would it? So I'm going to ask you to write This Workshop Rocks. And I'm going to have you do it 4 different ways. The first way, go ahead and use, if you're right-handed, then just write it right-handed with your normal writing hand. If you're left-handed, use your left hand. The second way, write it again, this time switch and use that non-dominant hand. So if you're normally right-handed, then number 2 is going to be with your left. Do that. Once you've done both of those, then I'd like you to go back to your normal writing hand, and I'd like you to take care and write slowly to the best of your ability with your normal writing hand. Take your time. Then I'd like you to do the same with your non-dominant hand. So switch, put it in your non-dominant hand, and very slowly, with great care, write This Workshop Rocks. Go ahead and do that for each of those 4 ways, and then kind of put that in front of you. All right, assuming you've had a chance to do that, let me go ahead and take a look at your results, and let me tell you what's typical. So this graph is now going to reveal for you what it generally looks like, and your outcome may reflect something similar. And so it goes from lowest to highest performance from left to right, right? And the green is your non-dominant hand. The blue is your dominant hand. And so you can see typically the lowest performance is that non-dominant hand, so kind of way number 2 when you wrote it. The second one was with your non-dominant, but just kind of writing it out. And then the with your non-dominant, but taking great care, so which was kind of way number 4, right? Then you usually see the next best performing, and it's generally above the okay line, moving up to quite good, or even getting close to great, is with your dominant hand. And then once you have invested effort using your dominant hand. So that's typically the way it goes, typically. Now here's the point of that, okay? Here, what you can see is relative to mastery. So let's say that you are trying to master something about your role, specific competencies within your role, but you're trying to master something, right? Look at the graph on the left. Look at the starting point, which is quite low. So imagine this is like your non-dominant hand, okay, on the left. Look at on the right, the starting point. So imagine that this is more equivalent to your dominant hand, assuming that mastery here is mastering your written ability, you know, your how you wrote This Workshop Rocks, and how good it looks, and getting it to look really, really good. So with that starting point being low, and now think about any particular skill or competence. Think about being that low. Look at the amount of effort that is needed to get to mastery. It's significant. Versus when you look at the right-hand side, that starting point, assuming that you've got some natural talent, and then remember we add knowledge and skills in order to turn it into a strength. But let's assume you've got some natural talent. You're starting at a much higher point. And so the distance to travel to mastery is much less. A key learning here, or recognition, is that on the left, it consumes so much more time, energy, effort than it does on the right. And so think about your day to day. If you are working from, and you're able to ensure, going back to that question that Gallup asked, and now only 20% of the working population surveyed responded that they agreed, do you have an opportunity to do what you do best every day? Well, assuming that you move the needle on that, okay, and you get it more toward that 80%, that you have the opportunity to do what you do best, then you've got a lot of extra effort here left in your tank, right? You're not just focusing all your energy and effort trying to do something that you're not naturally inclined to do, where it leaves you little effort to do anything else. Here, you've got things that you do very well automatically. Your work is aligned around that. And so now you have this extra gift, if you want to think of it that way, as time, energy, effort, leaving you additional capacity to focus on other things that you might not otherwise be able to, and therefore get more done. So when you think about people who really leverage their strengths in their day-to-day work, they are probably also people that you think of as being really efficient and effective. So not just effective, but also efficient in what they do. Let me share with you, and I think I mentioned earlier, my goal is not to sell the StrengthsFinder book. And in fact, sometimes I think that the tool can get in the way because it starts putting just, in a box. So my goal is not that. My goal is simply to share with you at this high level in the blue, 4 main categories of strengths that come out of StrengthsFinder. We've got strategic thinking, which is making sense of things and creating vision. Executing, which is accomplishing things and getting them done. Relationship building, which is your interest and your concern in the way that people are affected. And then influence, influencing others to reach goals. And then you can see the list of, there are 34 strengths that align with those 4 domains, so that fit in one of those domains. And you can see the notation that there's no done for many years researching this. Korn Ferry has also done decades worth of research looking at leaders and leadership competencies, and what are the competencies that differentiate high performing and lower performing leaders. So kind of what separates the high performing leaders from the lower performing leaders. And they've come up with this set of 38 competencies. But guess what? Those 38 competencies roll up into 4 factors. So just as StrengthsFinder had these 4 you see in the blue, Korn Ferry has these 4 factors that you see in, I guess, magenta, here toward the bottom part of the screen. And they align quite nicely. And so think of this as validation, I guess, for the strengths model, because we've got thought, understanding the business, making complex decisions, creating the new and different. So we've got thought, which aligns quite nicely with strategic thinking directly above it. Results, taking initiative, managing execution, focusing on performance, which aligns quite nicely with executing, accomplishing things and getting it done. We've got people, building collaborative relationships, optimizing diverse talent, influencing. And then we've got in here, I'm going to split and say this relates really to 2 of the StrengthsFinder's clusters. We've got the relationship building and the influencing. So the one that is a little more unique to the Korn Ferry model and these leadership competencies is authentic, open, flexible, and adaptable. And so know that there are really 2 messages on this slide. One is that there's a tremendous amount of correlation between 2 very different streams of research that come together in a nice way and reinforce the validity of each other. But the second message is don't lose sight of that self piece. That's being authentic, open, flexible, and adaptable. Don't lose sight of that, because even if you are leveraging your strengths and you're doing a really good job at that, if you don't have this self-awareness and self-management skill, then you're not going to be fully effective. So I do want to encourage you that's something that high-performing leaders do. So kind of a secret of high-performing leaders is that they tend to be very self-aware and able to manage themselves. So blend that in, leverage strengths, but make sure that you're really growing in your self-awareness and self-management. All right. Any comments, questions? Because we're about to switch in the remainder of our time, and we've got about 12 minutes left, 12, 13 minutes, is going to be on teams. I did want to spend the bulk of it on leadership and you kind of reflecting individually for yourself, but I also want to then now give some due attention to teams. So any quick questions before we make the shift so that I can share some information with you on teams, and then we'll take questions again at the end, assuming we've got time. Any initial questions?
Yeah. Excuse me. The chat box is quiet at this time, so I will try not to interject if you're moving forward. But I if we do get any questions, I'll go ahead and chime in. So.
Yep. And at the end, so I will try to leave at least a couple minutes. And so at the end, feel free to ask questions about either the leadership piece or the team piece. Okay. And they do go hand in hand. But want to share it with you. And the references, so far I've talked about kind of the strengths literature and then the Korn Ferry leadership competency literature. You're going to see that those references, if you want to go back and dig deeper, are going to be at the end of the slide deck. So you'll have access to those, as well as I'm going to add 2 more references. You can see a superscript 3 on this one. This is coming from an article called The Secrets of Great Teamwork, appropriately enough. And then there's going to be 1 more article, Teamwork on the Fly. They're both Harvard Business Review articles. So let me introduce to you some of these concepts. And first is team effectiveness criteria. So when you think about, before we talk about some of the secrets and what do high performing teams do versus those who aren't as high performing, first let's think about, what do we mean by team effectiveness when we're talking about high performing? Performing relative to what, right? Think about your teams in these 3 buckets: their output, their collaborative ability, and individual development. And let me take them in reverse for a moment. So let me start with individual development. And so here we're talking about ensuring that our team members individually are continuing to improve their knowledge, skills, and abilities. This goes directly back to what I've just been talking about. Be careful about how they're improving and what they're focusing on, and think about whether you want to create a culture that is leveraging and growing strengths, or one that is just focusing on improving and overcoming weaknesses. And so for the individual development, try to focus at least more maybe than is currently being done to leverage those the research that we saw and the benefit that you gain from focusing on strengths. So think about, how can you ensure that you're identifying and developing your workforce, individually in this case, their strengths, their knowledge, skills relative to their strengths. So they're taking those natural abilities, adding knowledge and skills, and turning it into their strengths. So they're taking their talents plus knowledge, skill equals strengths. So think about individual development and make sure all your people are continuing to grow and develop. That is one criteria that the research shows is important in terms of high performance. Another then is the collaborative ability. We're going to come back, and that's where I'm going to give you kind of 4 key secrets, 4 key things to do to promote that. So back on that one in a moment. But let's go to output then. Ultimately, in terms of is your team high performing or not, you've got to look at the output. You've got to look at, are your customers happy with what you are delivering, with its quality, its quantity? So you have to know first and foremost, who are your customers? So who are your key customers and stakeholders? And then what do they most want, need, and expect from you? Their key requirements. If you're not super clear on that, or if right now the answers that come to mind they're coming to mind because they're what you think they most need, want, and expect from you, then I will challenge you to test that, and ask yourself, how do I know? How do I know? Is this just because what we're observing and what we're talking about, inside the organization, or do we have a systematic approach to actually identify and hear from, listen and learn from our customers, gather that information, distill that, and understand and stay current with what they most need, want, and expect from us? So think about that. All right, so those are some team effectiveness criteria. Now let's take a look at, relative to that collaborative ability piece, kind of 4 enabling conditions. 4 enabling conditions. And first, you can see the 4 there in blue, but above them, here's what I'd like you to think about. Based on research, these are the small set of factors that have an oversized impact on team success. Okay, so you can achieve big returns if you focus on getting these things right. So given that we have limited time, attention, etc., if you're going to focus somewhere, focus on these things, because the research is showing, and it keeps bubbling up, that and it may be called different things in different articles. But if you were to do a meta-analysis, you would see these things continue to bubble up to the top. Okay. And so they are related to that collaborative ability, and they are compelling direction, strong structure, supportive context, and shared mindset. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one. You are going to have the information that I'm going to share right now. You're going to have on another slide, so you'll have the detail in case you just want to listen and take it in, as opposed to try to take copious notes. But relative to compelling direction, there are a few factors. The first is, do we have a common goal? Okay, do we have a common goal? Is that common goal clear? Is another factor. Is it compelling? And is it challenging but not impossible? Okay, so do we have a common goal? Is it clear? Is it compelling? And is it challenging but not impossible? So those are some things when you're considering, do I have a compelling direction? Have I established this for my team? Think about those factors. Relative to strong structure, think about, do we have the right number and mix of people in the first place? Do we have the right individuals, and do we have only the right individuals? Try to really manage group size. Research that once you start getting too large, that you start getting, the performance starts to go down, frankly, as opposed to up. You start getting some folks that are going to be doing less work. They're going to be kind of riding along on the coattails of the rest of the group, because, and you may have seen this when you have teams that are just too big. It's less manageable, and people think, my contribution really doesn't count. Look at all the other people that are a part of this. And so try to make sure that just the necessary people are involved in a particular work, so on a particular team, accomplishing a very specific goal, and also try to make sure that they are responsible. The team is able to have maximum responsibility for as much of the work from beginning to end as possible. Team performance starts to go down if there's just like a little piece that this team is responsible for, and then this other team they have to coordinate with responsible for this other piece, and then someone else has this piece. So try to make the chunks of work as big as possible for the team to be responsible for from beginning to end, and be able to have enough appropriate accountability to manage that work, but be getting regular feedback regarding that work. Okay. And then the final piece that I'll add about strong structure is, do you have clear norms for acceptable behavior? Is the team working under some guidelines, some norms that have been established that are going to help it to succeed? And is everyone on board and living those norms? And if they're not living those norms, are they getting appropriately, and this doesn't have to be done in a negative way, but appropriately kind of called out and held to those norms? Because if someone is sliding in a key area that's affecting the team and it's not addressed, then the other team's members are watching. They're observing that, and it says a lot. The next area is supportive context. And so here it is, do we have the resources, the information, the training that we need? So do we have everything that's necessary? And also, are there appropriate rewards for success? And ideally, they are team-based rewards as opposed to individual rewards, so that it is more of a, you're encouraging collaboration as opposed to competition. And then finally, shared mindset. Do the team members have a common and strong identity? So as opposed to viewing themselves as I, or even as, us versus them, if there's subgroups, ideally you want to have kind of one strong identity that is a we. So it's not an I, it's not an us or them, it's a we. It's a collective shared mindset. And then do you readily and actively share information with each other? So those are some keys. And then to wrap that piece up, and then I've just got one more thing that I want to share with you, and then we'll open it up to any final questions before we end our time. Here, and you'll have access to the slide deck, so please do leverage this. It's a quick assessment for you to use based on everything we've just talked about, the 3 key criteria and the 4 enabling conditions, you can do a quick litmus test of your team. How are you doing? A scale of 1 to 5, worst to best, rate them on the various criteria, and then think about where are the areas where we're strong that we can continue building on that strength and leveraging that strength, and where are the areas where we're not strong, what does it make sense to develop? So not focusing solely on that, but are there any showstop type of areas, derailers that we need to give some attention to, okay? And continuing to build. All right, so that is, that's from one of the articles I wanted to share. And then just a little bit on other article, which is teamwork on the fly. And there is a difference between when you look at the literature and you look at the language of teams and teaming. And the key difference is that these days, teaming is happening much more frequently because it's the fast bringing together of different people for a specific task that they work on, and then they disperse again, and then another group comes together, as opposed to teams, which are more of a longer term. Maybe you have a functional area that's the same members over and over that continue to meet. So it's kind of a longer term continuation versus a short term come and go very quickly. And the behaviors for successful teaming in the literature are listen, listen, listen. Make sure you're listening well. Reflect then on what you're hearing. Integrate it, pull together, and make sure you're sharing that back with the team and everyone is on the same page. Speaking up when appropriate, especially if you disagree, and having those difficult conversations. And then experiment, continuously test, continuously try to refine, even kind of parallel process, fail fast. Type of idea. So I know we're straight up at 2 o'clock, but I'm going to hang out for any questions that you all have. So either Bill or Mike, do we have any questions right now in the chat that I can respond to?
So I have the chat box open here. Please do, as Dr. St. John said, utilize it with any questions. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I don't see any, but I'll throw out a quick one. That's been striking me. First of all, Cynthia, fabulous job. We wouldn't expect any less. But thank you so much for your time and this great discussion. Really fascinating. And I did want to just throw out quickly. You remember the Strength Finder 4 categories. So I'm going to interview you, Cynthia, for the CEO position. And I've observed that I think you're really strong in terms of, presence and leadership. People skills, good with people, and good communicator. Okay. But, and these are not showstoppers now, because you made a distinction about showstoppers. So I'm going to make this more complex and say these are not showstoppers, but we do expect execution and strategy as well. So now we hire you, and all of a sudden people are pushing you to work on these supposed areas of strategy and execution. And you go, I'm here to build relationships. And let's say it's nonprofit and raise money. What is your view over that kind? I see that I could see that dynamic, beginning. So what is your suggestion there? Thank you.
Yeah. So there are elements of our jobs that frankly are not going to play to our strengths all of the time. Now we try to, when we are for ourselves looking at a position, we want to make sure, hopefully, that it's the best fit and it does play to our strengths at the majority of the time. We also want to try to do the same thing with those we are hiring. We want to hire to really leverage and ensure best fit for the other people's strengths. But to your specific question, Bill, so when you get into a role, or if you're currently in a role and you're finding that it doesn't play fully to your strengths, not all of the time, then you think about 4 different approaches to developing in those areas that are not your strengths on a continuum. And the first one, and this is, if it's inconsequential to the role, you can live with it. That's one option. At the low end of the continuum, you live with it. Okay. And you just go through your day, you do the best you can on that, but you're not going to invest any extra time, energy, effort to address it. if it's a showstopper, you obviously can't just live with it.
Yeah.
So
Right.
then the next step up is you compensate for it. That is trying to apply a different skill that you are good at. So you think about, and here, let me give you a specific example. Okay. I am not a salesperson. I would never be good at sales or at kind of development. That is not my thing. However, I am good and I really enjoy teaching, educating. And so if I can think about, all right, how can I leverage and have a little bit of a mind shift here and think about sales and development is really educating people about a product or a service that might really benefit them and finding that it is a match. And it's more about sharing information and how it might be helpful to them. That's now leveraging one of my skills, do something that is a part of my job that is not necessarily my strength. So that's the compensate for it. Next one up is the workaround. And that is you give cover to your lack of skill. One way of doing that is surrounding yourself with other people who are really good at it, and that is their strength. Okay, so surround yourself with others that compensate for maybe your weaknesses, and so that you've got the team collectively has the right skills on it. You individually may not possess all of them as one person, and likely you're not going to. Surround yourself with others who do. So that's kind of the next step up. And then the fourth, which is the most aggressive in terms of that development continuum, is develop. It's something that you prioritize, that you individually, you can't just surround yourself, you've got to do it. And so then, and only, I would say only then, if you can't live with it, you can't compensate for it, you can't work around it, then develop it. And there, if you want more information on that, reach out. That's actually an area I love talking about. And there's a concept called 70-20-10 in terms of developing and how you develop. So if you have more questions about that, please reach out. Happy to have a conversation.
Great. And Dr. St. John, we actually have a couple comments, one question. So the first question was coming from Richard. He said, I'm fostering individual development. I constantly preach the need to develop, in his case, sales skills to my team, reading books, etc. What other ways can I reinforce the need to develop strengths, selling in his case, which helps the entire team win, which would be their goals?
Okay. And let me make sure I understand the question. So to reinforce the developing of selling skills, because I could also give you, if you want, in terms of how to develop them, I mentioned a moment ago, 70-20-10, which I think that might actually help address your question, Richard. So let me share briefly about that. If it doesn't answer it, then ask me a follow-up, okay? So when you're encouraging folks to develop in a particular area, 70-20-10 is the idea of, and oftentimes we reverse this. Okay, let me start with I'll start with the 70, which is kind of on the job exposure, where so Richard, in your case, if it's sales, you find someone who is really good, okay, and you pair them with people that you're wanting to develop. And you have them learn firsthand from that individual, the one that is kind of your top person. So they're learning good practices, but they're learning on the job, learning by doing. That should actually be 70% of the development work that's being done if you've chosen kind of that high end of the continuum and you're truly going to develop a skill. You're not going to live with it. You're not going to compensate it. You're not going to work around. Okay. So 70% should be on the job, hands-on, learning that way. 20% is then social learning. And by the way, there's research that backs this up. 20% is ideally social learning, which is more coaching, mentoring, communities of practice, things like that, okay? That's more of that social learning, getting groups of people together and working through things, or one-on-one with another individual in a coaching or mentoring environment. And then the 10, and here's where we usually reverse it. We usually think about, we do 70% of this, and that is more of the formal learning, okay? The formal, taking a specific workshop or class, or, not that I want to minimize degree programs. Please don't take that message away from this. No. It is really important. It's foundational. It's fundamental. This is kind of above and beyond, okay? You need that as the starting point. But then once you're into your field and you're growing and continuing to develop, then think about this 70-20-10 in those proportions to on the social and more of the formal traditional learning. Does that help, Richard? I can visually see you nodding, so that's
Good stuff. You know, and then the other, of course, is more of a favorable comment saying just a topic, Dr. St. John, that I totally agree with. You did such a great job presenting this in a simplistic fashion, and mentioned that they just took the Strength Finder assessment about 10 months ago and found that they are a high woo, empathy and includer, which works well with their last position and their
fantastic.
Yeah. And Richard mentioned he likes the idea of pairing up, and he's going to work with that for the OJT portion. You know, and I will say this on a personal note. You know, I'm in an interim role myself, and what I've discovered coming into an interim kind of management capacity is that you know, it's very similar to the way that in my experience with higher education, I'm a true believer in playing into teams that I'm a part of or that I'm managing into the strengths of those individuals so that they feel energized and excited about what they're doing in their day to day. And of course, with the realistic or the reality of knowing that there's of course going to be those 10 to 15% of operational things that they may not be super excited about, but needs to get done within their purview. Where I'm going, I guess, with this is I think that sometimes, especially in any kind of industry that you come into as a new leader or an interim role, as I am, you find yourself in these positions where you're also trying to, the mission may not change of the organization you're with or the place you're a part of. However, you're trying to very much shift the culture. You're trying to make, you know, this internal change of where you're at, you know, and it's not necessarily saying that it's a negative culture before, but you know that you can meet your mission more effectively in your mind with your vision if there's a culture that, let's say, increases transparency or in collaboration and everything else. So, you know, I'm not necessarily sure there's a question in here as much as there is a, you know, do you have any advice for people that are coming into this change management kind of issue or interim roles like I am, you know, that type of situation?
Yeah, and everything that you described is very much on point, because oftentimes when you come into a new role, first of all, think about, and there are multiple books written on this. It's actually an area of interest in mine that I've done some coaching with folks. So I love kind of the first, whether you call it the first 90 days, the first 100 days. And there are lots of resources out there that can help you with some structure in terms of what to do and cover certain things. So I encourage you to take advantage of those resources.
Absolutely.
But as you then continue in that role, the key is really, and especially upfront, listening and learning, looking around, what is needed, what are the things, and then you can separate them into low-hanging fruit and longer term change needs, and address the ones that are the low-hanging fruits. Once you're listening and learning to key, so again, you have to understand who your key customers and stakeholders are and what they most need, want, and expect, right? And then how are you currently doing relative to that? And so tying it back to those kind of factors for effective teams, how are you doing? And then creating the low-hanging fruit list and start knocking those off. So folks are immediately seeing progress. They're immediately seeing things happen, which is kind of, it's self-sustaining, it's motivating, and so you do that. But then there's going to be those longer term ones. And that's where you need to then prioritize, and likely you're not going to be able to fix them yourselves. And so put a team around it, guide the team, and they're more often than not going to involve culture change. Is a short-term initiative. That is a long-term initiative, but it's one that is the most important to do, because that sets the stage for everything else that you do. And it does need to reinforce your mission, your vision, your values, so that everything is in alignment. And also then what your key objectives are for the next year, for the next, if you have a longer term, 3 or 5 years, whatever that looks like. But if you're an interim, you got to focus on that short term, and you got to really kind of deliver value pretty quickly. But first, do a complete absorption and really listen and learn, so you make sure that what you're delivering is perceived as valuable to those who matter most.
Phenomenal response. I appreciate that. And not to say I will ever take advantage of this, but I love the fact that I will want to take advantage of this, but I won't, use up your valuable time. But I love the fact that you're a part of our organization at the Fort Worth campus now after this pandemic, and we are in close proximity. So I greatly appreciate your experience.
That's right. You can
That's
come
right.
right down the hall.
Yeah.
That's right.